Welcome to episode 28, Construction Nation. This is Sue Dyer, your host of Construction Dream Team, where I interview industry leaders and experts so you can learn about the people side of construction and build your construction dream team. Based on OPE, other people's experiences, the shortest way to success is to learn from others who've already been there and done that. They've already paid the price, so you don't have to. I would like, hopefully everyone is listening because you're on here listening to us right now. If you would jump on over to iTunes and subscribe, that would be great. That way you won't miss an episode. And if you scroll down just a little bit on iTunes, if you look to the stars that are there, if you push the one that's farthest to the right, that will give us a 5-star rating. And that does help us in the search engines for more people in Construction Nation to find us. So if you would do that, I really appreciate it, and subscribe. And of course, share the episodes with your team. You can't do this alone. Teams are not built by one person. They're built by a collective of people who are working together. And the more that you can share this knowledge and the insights you get from all these wonderful people who are sharing their life's knowledge, the faster and better you're going to be, and the faster and better your team's going to be. So with that, let us dive into our episode today. I am very excited to have our guest today. Donna Laquidara Carr is the director for our industry insights and research at Dodge Data and Analytics. And Donna has worked with Dodge for over 20 years. So think about the perspective she has in that vantage point she has. She's seen the industry over a long period of times where we had good times, bad times, and lots of changes, as well as she's seeing the research of what's happening. So she can begin to look at what they thought was going to happen, what actually happened, and what they think is going to happen now. She can connect the dots for us in a way that perhaps very few people in the world could. And so we're very excited to have her today. She is also the managing editor for the Smart Market Report that many of you probably get or see. There's parts of it in E&R magazine. And she's been in that post since 2010. So Donna, thank you so much for joining us here at Construction Nation and for sharing your expertise.
Sue, it's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So you've been working at Dodge for over 20 years, and I'm sure that you've had a wandering path, as most of us have. Can you tell us a little bit about what has brought you to where you are today as the Director of Industry Insights Research?
Sure. So it's interesting. All my life, I've been sort of connected to the construction industry. So my father was a general contractor, and I actually worked in his office during summers when I was a teenager and in college. But I never thought I was going to actually work with anything to do with this particular industry. I was an English major at college. But when I got out and I was in Boston, I landed up at Dodge. Now, my husband's an architect, so I can't seem to quite get away from it. I actually joined Dodge as part of their news gathering organization, the Dodge reporters who call contractors and call architects to find out what projects they're working on. And I did that for about 8 years, and then I left. I thought, oh, that was interesting. Now I'm going to move on to a different phase. And I went to go get my PhD in English, which I did do. But in the process of doing that, I landed up moving back to Boston, needing a little bit of work part-time, landed up working for Dodge again, just because my experience allowed them to fill a gap that they had at that point. And I landed up staying even after I got my PhD because I had the opportunity to become the training and policy manager in the news gathering organization. And that was fascinating because I really got to sort of help shape the kind of policies that they were pursuing. And that was around the mid-2000s. And the green building movement was really moving right then from being something that was on the fringe to becoming much more mainstream. And I was very, very engaged in this. I was trying to develop policies for it. For Dodge, I landed up working with the people in this industry insights group who were the sustainability experts in our organization. I got pretty close to them while we were developing the policy, and I told them how interested I was in what they do, the kind of research and analysis that they do, and this working on the sustainability side, and landed up when a job opening came up, moving over to this position.
That's exciting. So I thought we got a lot of insights from that. Also, where your creativity is looking at maybe the research, which was awesome to see that. I'm not sure everyone would have seen that that was a huge opportunity and wanted to be there. One nerd to another, I probably would have. And I also love the idea that there's news gatherers out there gathering the news of the industry. And then there's research that's helping to guide the industry and the trends. You guys are always watching the trends. So that's exactly what we're hoping to hear from you today. So you have had this vision, this seat to the industry for 20 years. So that's just totally awesome. So I know you're a leader in the industry, and I'm sure you lead things within your organization. So tell us a little bit about what you think is your greatest strength as a leader.
Well, it's interesting. I've always had a challenge in terms of ever since I moved out of news gathering, I haven't really had anyone who reported to me. So, in developing my leadership skills, I had to learn how to lead peers, not lead those beneath me. And that is an interesting set of skills. I think that the most important thing when you have to do something like that is always recognize, and it's funny because this kind of fits in with a lot of what our research says about what works in construction as well, but it's always finding ways to think of yourselves as a collaborator. If you're going to lead someone who's a peer rather than being their superior in the organization, what you have to do is you have to respect what they're bringing to the table, and you have to be able to listen to them and be able to convey your ideas clearly and really be able to get that collaborative connection going. And I've always felt like the way that I'm able to support others encourages others to support me. And in some ways, that is exactly where I land up leading from.
That is a magnificent skill. And I think that so many of the of us out there, we all have our peers, and sometimes we're in the middle. We're always in the middle somewhere of something, and it's
Mhm.
you got to try to influence from where you are. And I think that's awesome. And being a collaborator sounds perfect. So the rest of what we're going to talk about is going to help everybody in learning how to be a better leader. So one of the things that I know Donna had mentioned to me that they've done some research on collaboration. So can you tell us about that?
Sure, I'll be happy to. Although it's interesting, when we started these projects, they were not actually intended to be research about collaboration. What we've actually done several studies. I want to focus on two in particular in this particular discussion because I think they're the most compelling and have the most evidence. But we've done several studies on project outcomes, on what improves them, trying to give the industry some guidance about what makes projects better, how you can deliver better in terms of cost, schedule, quality, owner satisfaction, all of that. And what it's come out time and again is that collaboration is at the heart of it. And like I said, we do have a couple of specific studies that really demonstrate that in a very compelling way. And both of the ones I want to talk about today, we did with the Lean Construction Institute as our main partner. That's sort of the structure of how we do studies in general. We work with partners in the industry who help to fund the studies. In this particular case, this was a series we did with them. We did one just with owners, and then we did one with designers. And I'm going to focus a little bit more on the owner one because the findings were a little bit similar, and I think the owner one really gets at the heart of this. So I think it's easiest if I explain the format of the studies, the approach we took. With everyone who participated, all the owners who participated were asked to think of two specific projects, not generally think about how projects go, but to really hone in and pick two different projects that they had done in the last 5 years. One of them had to be an example of what they consider to be one of their best projects in that time frame. And the other one had to be an example of what they consider to be a more typical project in terms of outcomes. Now, I can't emphasize this point enough, and I might come back to it again just because I think people often assume, oh, it's comparing the best and the worst. And it's not. We ask them about what they do on best projects, but we also ask them what they do on typical projects, which is so different from looking at the worst. Things can just go terribly wrong on your worst project. And what we were trying to get at is what can make the industry in general much better at what it does. So that's why typical projects were much more compelling than best projects for us for this comparison. Now, one of the first things we did as a kickoff to this study is that we asked about the performance that they saw on each of these two types of projects in terms of budget, schedule, quality, and safety. Now, obviously, the whole study was set up so that there would be a difference, but I think it's still worth pointing out how big the difference is. So let me give you a few examples. When it comes to schedule, 79% of the owners said their best project finished on schedule or even earlier. That was only true of 39% of the typical projects.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yes, exactly. So that means that for most owners, a typical project experience is that it doesn't finish on schedule. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to budget, you see something, the difference isn't quite as stark, but it's still really big. 83% of the owners said their best projects finished on budget, compared with 51% of the typical projects. And we see the similar variations for quality expectations, very similar to budget in that case, and even safety. We asked them to rate the safety of their projects on a scale of 1 to 4, and I won't go into the details about what each rating was, but 4 was the highest and 1 was the lowest. 56% gave their best projects a 4 rating. And by the way, a 3 rating was still very good. There was definitely a line. 3 and 4 were good. 1 and 2 weren't very good. And 56% gave them that 4 rating of their best projects. Only 28% of the typical projects achieved that 4 rating for safety. So you can see that we did demonstrate that there's a big gap in the industry right now between what owners feel is happening on their best projects and how owners think things are going on their typical projects. And of course, everybody, right? All of your listeners out there, they want to get to the point where all of their owners want to identify their projects as the best projects, right? So what we then did is we asked them about, well, what was specifically happening on their best projects and their typical projects? We just asked them to rate a series of things. And some of the most striking findings that emerged were around team dynamics. 68% of the owners on best projects said that their team chemistry was, again, at that highest level, compared to 10% of the typical projects. So it's very rare to have great team chemistry on a typical project, and it's very common to have it on a best project. And you see the same thing about the level of integration of project team members, with 61% saying that they saw the highest level of team integration on their projects compared to 9% on their typical projects. So clearly, that's a strong correlation to the idea of team chemistry, team integration, and high levels of performance. And then the most compelling piece of data that we gathered from this study was that when the key stakeholders were engaged, right? This is a pretty straightforward question. This isn't one that relies on judgment. Well, this is how I felt about the team. Maybe other team members might evaluate that a little differently. But this is just, when did you bring everybody on board? And in this particular study, we were very careful. We gave them a definition of what key stakeholders mean. And it certainly means the architect, the engineers, and the prime contractor. But it's also the key trades. So, if mechanical, electrical, structural, if those were really important components of the project, it had to be when they were engaged too, not just when the prime contractor was engaged. And on best projects, 76% of the owners engaged their key stakeholders before schematic design. So those key stakeholders influenced the entire design process. That only happened. There are only 34% of the owners said that they did the same thing on their typical project. So again, this isn't causal. We don't have data that proves that one causes the other, but it's certainly a very compelling correlation between bringing the team in early and allowing them the chance to integrate and the chance to work together versus bringing them in much, much later.
Yes, and the chance for the team to really have an impact on the success of the project is got to be exponential, bringing them in early, because once it's already designed and you're in construction, there's not a whole lot you can do. That's very exciting. So collaboration, integration, coming together is again showing that there's a lot more benefit to that than doing things sort of as we have been typically doing them. So that's exciting.
Exactly. And yeah, and one of the big surprises though was that we also asked about delivery method, and we thought, oh, for sure, delivery method's going to absolutely correspond. That the more collaborative the delivery method is, by far, we'll see the same huge differentials between best and typical projects. And surprisingly, while there were certain things, we certainly saw that IPD was far more frequently used on best projects than it was on typical. I think it was used on almost none of the typical projects. It's used on roughly 22% of the best projects. And, we did see some correlation. In general, though, I think the findings also demonstrated that if you're doing this kind of team integration, if you can get the team working together as a cohesive unit, then, the delivery system can be a tool to get to that, but it's not essential to make sure you have some sort of integration, that there's more to building a team than just the delivery method.
That would be what my experience has been too, having worked on thousands of projects with every kind of delivery method you can imagine. That while some of the delivery methods are by nature more collaborative, it doesn't mean the team is necessarily going to be collaborative without some kind of impetus to become collaborative and maybe leadership to help that form and happen. That's awesome. That's awesome. So I know that you also publish a commercial cost index. So what have you learned from this that can help projects improve?
Sure. So the commercial construction index, let me just explain what that is a little bit. So we actually, technically, we're not the publishers. It is published by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and USG, but in partnership. But they came to us a few years ago and asked us if we would provide the data to support it and the analysis. So we do a quarterly survey of both general and trade contractors, and it's about an even split, about 50-50 between them. And using our contractor panel, which are a group of contractors who have opted in and said, yes, occasionally I would like to participate in surveys. And we, give them a small incentive to do that on a per survey basis. So we do this quarterly survey with them. And then we present them with the analysis of what we find the results mean. And the goal of this project is to get a snapshot on a quarterly basis of how contractors think the industry is doing, how healthy they think it is, and based on their real experiences, based on their anticipation of whether or not the market is going to be able to bring them work, based on the revenue expectations for the next year, based on their backlog for the next year. Those three elements all go into an index number that we create every quarter. Now, since we started this in 2017, I'm sure that you and the rest of your audience is pretty aware we haven't actually seen a lot of movement in the index number because the industry's been booming. So the index number has been very positive and very high through the whole thing. But in addition to that, to understand the market better, we look at other things. We look at the challenges they face in terms of workforce, finding the skilled labor. We measure that every quarter, how difficult they're reporting finding skilled labor is, and a bunch of follow-through questions on that. We look at the degree to which they themselves are able to get financing and the degree to which they think their owners are able to have access to financing, to kind of gauge where they think, whether they see a problem coming on that in the future. And of course, we ask them about what they're experiencing in terms of material prices, the challenges they're facing there. We saw a bit of a spike back when back when the tariffs came in, and in 2018 we saw that increasing as a bit of a challenge. Although in 2019 it's calmed back down a little bit so far, at least it's in the Q1 survey. We're still analyzing the Q2 one right now. So, and then finally, because we knew that we were doing this study quarterly, right? And we want to bring something of value to the industry every quarter. And sometimes a lot of this data tends to stay the same from quarter to quarter. We realized it would be really, really a great opportunity to just devote a small section of the survey every quarter to a different important trend out there in the industry. We've looked at everything from prefabrication to safety to sustainability. We've done a couple on sustainability, to technology, advanced technologies, and what they're most excited about. We've had a lot of little glimpses. These aren't deep, intense studies. These are just 8, 9 questions on a topic, but that really show what the industry is thinking about it, the things that are changing so rapidly right now.
So I have 2 questions for that. One is, how can someone use this information, or how do you see people using this information? That's probably a better question. And the second question, where can people find the index?
That's a great question. Everything that I'm talking about today can be accessed on our own website on construction.com. Even though we don't publish the report ourselves, we do feature it on construction.com. So if you go to construction.com and you go to the resources tab, and you go down on that and pick reports, every quarter that report appears, and it usually appears in about the middle of the month at the end of the quarter. So the Q1 one appeared in March, the next one will appear in June, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where you would access those. And really, in some ways, I think it's just helpful sometimes if you're a contractor to understand what your peers are thinking and what they're saying. What are they really worried about? And, how do you compare to it? I think it helps to take that step back and really understand where you stand in the industry, where your peers are seeing problems, and maybe things that you should be thinking about. Like for instance, this is a little bit off topic, but one of the things that we looked into a little while back was what contractors are doing. This was part of the safety piece. What contractors are doing about their concerns about opioid use, marijuana, and alcohol use. And just seeing the degree to which their peers have programs in place to deal with this or not. What we learned is that the industry is really struggling about what to do with opioids right now. That most, over half didn't really have any kind of plan in place to deal with this particular issue. And most of those who do it by pre-screening or by setting up a few programs, get their workers into programs when they think there's a problem. A lot try to have policies that are very strict on use so that if someone gets caught, it's a one-time thing, that they can act on it based on just one example. Because of course, the hazards are so great in construction. You really have to be concerned about someone who's impaired being on a job site for their coworkers, for the bystanders, if it's in a busy site, for a lot of reasons. So, but I don't know that every contractor, I think it would be interesting to see, well, here's the list of things that your peers say that they're doing to address a thorny issue like this. No one's doing everything. So it's got to give people some new ideas.
Absolutely.
Right?
And also to see the trends, because the trends show up in what people see over and over and over and over. I mean, you begin to see the waves are happening, and then you can plan. It may not be perfect, but it's going to be an indicator at the very least. So there you go, construction.com, go down to resources, and I'll put a link in the show notes to this, but you can go anytime and go there to construction.com resources and go down to reports. So I understand you also did a study on managing uncertainty. And did you learn something about collaboration in that study as well?
Yes, we did. In that particular study, what that was about was really understanding the causes of uncertainty in construction. We really wanted to take a step back and really take a look. And this was an intensive study. We did actually 2 different surveys. First, we surveyed about forget the number now, about 4,000 people in the industry using the association partners that we had to really do a broad net just to figure out what really simple survey that really just asked them, what are the biggest causes of uncertainty that you tend to experience? And that narrowed us down to 7 causes, which we then did a more focused survey using, again, our contractor panel and some of our other resources with architects, contractors, and owners to really dive in to those 7 causes. And those 7 causes were included things like unforeseen site conditions, just tend to just always be a challenge on a lot of projects, to owner-driven changes, right? If your owner is changing the scope of work, if they're not providing enough leadership, that can be a real problem. Acceleration of the schedule by the owner was also another cause that it looks at specifically. We looked at design errors and emissions. That was another one of the major causes of uncertainty. And construction coordination issues and contractor caused delays. And we found out some interesting things. And it's almost more about the nature of how people tend to think about their area of construction than it is the kind of hard data we had from the LCI study, the lean construction study with the owners. What we found is that for most of these, either the owner, the designer, or the contractor is fundamentally the problem, right? If it's design errors and emissions, that's on the designer. If it's owner-driven changes or accelerated schedule, that's on the owner. And if it's construction coordination issues and contractor cost delays, that's obviously on the contractor. We found that generally, when we asked them to rate how much of a problem each of these were, how typically damaging they can be on projects, that they tended to underestimate the issues that they cause, and they tended to overestimate the issues that others cause pretty consistently. I have to say the contractors fared better than most. Very few said the contractors were the biggest problem, but the architects definitely felt the owners were a much bigger problem than them, and the contractors were a somewhat bigger problem than them. And the owners felt the architects were the biggest problem, and then the contractors were a bigger problem than they were. So it sort of tells you. And, again, this isn't about, construction, unfortunately, can be very much a litigious thing. And there's a lot of mechanisms because of that in place for contractors to protect themselves. And we've done other risk studies that look at that. But in the end of the day, I think it's also, it's just human nature, right, to understand. But I think it also, if you're going to start thinking about collaboration, I think one of the first things you have to do is recognize that you are in that mindset, that you are sitting in your seat and you're not sitting in theirs. And they may have a very different perspective of what the challenges are that you're facing. I think sometimes it really takes getting out of that single mindset and really being able, and I don't think you can do that unless the structures are in place to help, right? Unless you really are able to work with someone else to get their perspective, to have a conversation rather than just having things passed down the line.
And you do have to be willing to listen. That's what I was telling you. You have to listen to understand where other people are coming from, because actually you may both be right. And you're right from your perspective.
Exactly.
And until you listen to each other, you don't understand that the problem actually has more dimensions than you alone think. And therefore you can't really create a great solution.
That is very correct. That is dead on. And it really does correspond to what we found in the study. I don't think any of these people were wrong. I mean, I think from a contractor's point of view, those architect delays are the biggest problems they have because they can manage the problems they cause themselves. And, that's how the designers feel like once something leaves them and it's out of their control, or if the owner's taking control from them, that's a bigger challenge to them personally. So we weren't looking for who was right, but we did capture a very strong difference in the industry. We also captured a difference in terms of how owners view the quality and what they're getting out of projects differently than their teams. That the owners was that mostly when we asked them to rate the average quality of their projects, most of them were pretty positive, but not compared to the architect and contractor results. The vast majority of the architects and contractors really felt that owners were very, very satisfied with their project. But only about a little bit over half of the owners reported being very, very satisfied with the project. So again, there's a bit of a disconnect, just understanding where the other person is sitting and understanding the disconnects that are out there can be critical.
One of the
At the end of the study,
ironic things that stays sitting in my mind as you're talking about this is that I think it happens on every project. I mean, I see it a lot where people think that if only the designer had done this, the owner had done this, the contractor had done this, the CM had done this, I wouldn't have what the problems I have. The most ironic thing is that it's because you're sitting separately that you have the problems.
Exactly. No, it's true. And that's why, one of the things I forgot to mention when we were talking about the lean study, of course, in addition to all those things that I did talk about, we asked about actual lean practices, right? To see which ones were correlated with success. The one that was most dramatically, according to the owners, correlated with success was putting people in the big room, doing that. I don't know how many of your leaders or your listeners are familiar with this, but big room is exactly what it sounds like. You set up a single space for the entire team and they all work out of it. And they all are and that is the single biggest practice that was connected to success. So it really is telling about what you can do when you're conscious that this has such a big impact. But anyway, what I was going to say is at the end of this particular study, but going back to the managing uncertainty one, we did ask them about the strategies that can best mitigate all those problems we just talked about. And interesting, we gave them a lot of mitigation factors to look at and had them rate them. In the report, which again is available on our website, there's a big chart at the end that shows how people rated not just overall each solution, but each solution for each of the problems. Which one is best for dealing with having unforeseen site conditions? Which one is best for dealing with owner-driven changes? Which one is best for dealing with design errors? And but what was interesting is that across the board, better communication was always ranked higher than any of the other mitigation factors that we had in play, even for something that seems completely not communication related, like unforeseen site conditions. Because once you find it, you can't stop those from happening, right? With better communication. But once you find them, how can you mitigate their impact? And that is where the better communication also comes in. So
it's also about when do you find them? If you communicate, if you know it sooner, you can do something about it.
Exactly. And so, even this using a more collaborative design delivery system, again, in this study as well, we saw that was important, but it didn't compare. It was way down the list compared to this, just the idea of better communication. And awesome. And it's interesting too, because I know we started. I'm sorry, I know we're popping all over the place, but we when we started talking about the commercial construction index, and one of the things that we had decided to look at is that question, that quarterly topic that changes every time. We really wanted to, we were hearing a lot, every survey, and this is going to be no surprise to your listeners, every survey. Lack of skilled workers is the biggest problem contractors are facing right now. Right now, that is the hurdle, the challenge. It's been true since 2017. We haven't seen it budge. We haven't seen anything else really come close, even as we saw a concern about materials creep up in 2018. So as we watched this happening, we decided we were going to look at, let's look at skills. What skills are missing? What skills do they need? And what we did is we gave them a list of skills, that include technical skills, doing the things they're physically doing on their jobs, and a bunch of other things. Digital skills was also included. But we asked them to rate the skills in terms of how important they thought it was for their workers to have those skills. And then we asked them to rate the proficiency of their workers at these skills. So where we found the biggest gap between importance and proficiency was in communication skills. We saw that 70% of the contractors considered them important, but only 39% felt that their workers really had strong skills in this area. So that's another thing that your listeners might need to think about is how can a contractor improve the communication skills of their workers?
Yes, and communication is interesting because sometimes what we think is a communication issue could actually be a symptom of something else, like misaligned expectations or something. So it's
Mm-hmm.
important to really drill down and figure out what is the real issue, because you can't solve it till you really understand it.
But no, I mean, it's really
Yes,
interesting, right? I mean, that communication is such a large term. Just really narrowing down on that would
yes.
help the industry.
Well, that's where my life's work has been, is focusing on helping the teams to communicate and collaborate and create cohesion. Yeah.
Excellent.
So tell us a little bit about Dodge data and analytics. I think it's fascinating, maybe a little bit how it evolved to be what it is and kind of what the mission is and maybe all the things you guys do.
Sure. So Dodge Data and Analytics has been around for a long time in one form or another. It was founded in the 1890s. So by a guy named Fred Dodge, who was on a bicycle in Boston, bicycling around gathering news on construction projects. So that's the heart of it. That's where it started. And honestly, it's interesting for me to say this because what I do is a little bit different from that. But the heart of the company is definitely the data we gather. We have the most comprehensive database of projects, and we track them in the US, and we track them from pre design all the way through to when construction starts. So that's our primary focus. And so that gives us a great overview of the different players, who's working with whom, right? Who is actually doing what kind of projects. And it also gives us the ability, and we've had this since the late 1960s, we started gathering this data in a real database that could be used for forecasting purposes. So we've got an amazing team of economists who work here in the office that I do and who are part of my division, who look at the forecast for what's going to happen in the industry 1 year out, 5 years out, based on the data, based on the history and the patterns that they've seen in the past, and also based on their training and their algorithms that they can come up with by watching all the factors that are influencing construction. So that's incredible. People don't realize too, I think, that it's so much. While the lead service we provide is really important to so many people in the industry, there's also this, you can also use the data in so many other analytical ways. It can be used to really understand markets in a deeper fashion. And then there's the piece that I sit in, right? Which takes the contact information we have, this connection to who's really making decisions out there in the construction industry, and uses that to conduct research. So we do custom market research. We do private research for companies that just want to understand, well, what's my market share? How's my market changing? What do I need to do to keep up with it? That we do that kind of research all the time. And we do research, again, on the research that I'm most engaged in on the trends research, where we work with partners in the industry who are interested in becoming thought leaders themselves, who are interested in connecting to their audiences, right? Telling their audiences information about their industry that the audiences want to hear. And they hire us. That's why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce came to us, because they wanted to connect with that construction audience more. And they wanted that kind of information that audience would find compelling.
Wow, that sounds pretty remarkable. And what a true blessing to the industry in so many ways that we have a place that's gathering it. Because in an industry that's so fragmented, think about if we didn't have somewhere where things were aggregating, we'd really be even more fragmented.
Yes. And we did mention in the beginning that I've been working for Dodge since the late 1980s. And I have to tell you, it's for just in the last maybe 10, 15 years, it feels like this industry, which is so traditional, has so many ties to traditional great craftsmanship and ways to do things. But now there's so much change. There's been such an extraordinary evolution, and it feels like it's just accelerating at this point. It doesn't feel like, oh, we've peaked through this big change. It feels like it's just starting. So this is really a critical time to understand what's going on in the industry because everything seems to be shifting around a little bit. For example, one of the studies that we're going to be launching this year is on prefabrication and modularization. And that has the potential to be a true disruptor in the industry in terms of how buildings get built, how teams are put together, what can happen in terms of guaranteeing quality, dealing with skilled worker shortages, and if you're in this industry, that's the kind of thing you really need to understand.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. When does that one come out?
That won't be coming out till the fall. We are still
Okay, well,
working
we'll
up
be
the
waiting.
survey. So
Maybe you can come back in the fall and tell us about that one. That would be exciting.
yeah,
Because I do see that as a huge trend on large projects or repetitive things.
yep, exactly.
So I know that you've been in the industry really since birth and you have taken on different jobs and education. And I'm sure not everything has always gone exactly as you had hoped it would. What is the biggest challenge you've ever faced in your career? Take us back to your very worst moment.
Well, that's an interesting question because it's actually does it's it, the when I as I mentioned when I was working at Donna, I had decided that I'd done it for 8 years and I was very happy, but I was ready to move on, and I decided I wanted to get my PhD. I'd already had my master's going into the job, and I'd always been one of those good students and I applied to schools and I thought, oh, this is great. And I took my GREs and that all went well and everything's great. And then I got rejected by every school I applied to. And I had a real decision point there, right? I mean, I could either just accept that that rejection had happened and figure out something else to do, or I could try to figure out why and figure out what my options were. And I think one of the hardest things I ever did in my life was calling up all these schools who rejected me and not all of them would talk to me, but really getting people on the phone and finding out what it was about what I put forward to them that caused them to reject me. And that, difficult as it was, gave me what the gaps were, what the issues they had with me were. I was able to go take some graduate level classes at Northeastern University while I was still working at Dodge, build up on that a little bit and resubmit. And then I landed up at Tulane University. And it was really rewarding and productive to get that feedback, even though it was really hard to have a lot of people tell you why they rejected you.
But you could not have done anything about it if you didn't know why, huh? That's awesome.
Exactly.
Congratulations on all the hard work and perseverance. So, what do you think is the very best advice you've ever gotten?
That's a challenging question. It's weird. I don't know that I've gotten that much advice at work. And I realized that more than advice, what I've really found helpful to me is the people that I can model myself on. And, it can be, for me, it's been people like my mother, even. My mother was raising a family of 5 and helping my father. You know how contract construction companies are. Sometimes they're family businesses, right? And everybody's chipping in. So my mother ran the business side of my dad's organization. And she was able to do that because she was always this incredibly organized person. And I don't have that innate organizational gene. She didn't pass it on to me. So the best I could do was model myself. When I've needed to understand how to organize, I could model my behavior on my mother's behavior. Another one that was very influential was someone that I worked for when I first moved into this role, who was a perfectionist. Now, it's not always easy working for a perfectionist, but they do teach you how to really raise your game, how to try to continually improve things. And I learned so much from that occasion too. So I feel like the people that I can model on have been more influential for me than any particular piece of advice I was ever given.
I love that. And that's really kind of the idea of this entire podcast, is that we can learn from each other and model from what other people have learned works and doesn't work. And I love that. So how can we get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. So you can definitely just use LinkedIn. There's not a lot of Laquidaras out in this world, and there's even fewer Laquidara Cars. So assuming that, that anyone who's clicking on the podcast will be able to see my name, they will be able to find me. They're not going to run into a list of 20 people that all have the same name.
And we will put your LinkedIn link on the show notes so everybody can find you there at constructiondreamteam.com for this episode number 28. And so what is your parting advice for all of us?
Well, I think it's sort of, in some ways, it's probably unnecessary advice for your listeners because they're already doing something like listening to your wonderful podcast. But I feel like the best advice I can give is that it goes back to something I already said, which is that construction right now is evolving so dramatically. It's changing. And I think if you're really engaged and this industry is your career, you need to not just you need to set aside a small amount of time, maybe an hour a month, maybe a half an hour a week to expose yourself to the trends that are going on, to expose yourself to what people are saying, to sign up for newsletters. We have a couple here at Dodge that it's like Market Dynamics and like that track our research on trends. But there's a lot of other material that I follow beyond what Dodge produces, certainly, that allows us, and of course I have a little bit more time than most of your listeners do, but really just trying to actually find that dedicated moment of time, setting aside something so that you can see the larger industry that you're so deeply engaged in and understand how it's changing.
Wow. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here and sharing your perspective and all the research that you're doing. And we will make links on the show notes so people can find the research. And I hope that you'll come back in the fall and we will talk about the new research on modularization. That I do see that as a huge trend. So I hope you'll come back. And I thank you so much, Donna, for being here.
Sure. It was a pleasure, Sue.
Okay, Construction Nation, remember, dream teams don't just happen. They're built one step at a time, and you need to be informed. So get informed and make sure you're following the trends in the industry so that you don't get left behind. In the podcast here, we're trying to tap into the collective wisdom and also show you what's happening so that you can know where to go and who to talk to and what you need to do to be successful. But you can't do that alone. You've got to have your entire team. So get them listening to the podcast. Let them find out the information, and they may see something and hear something that you don't, which might be the key to really a transformation for some aspect of what you're doing. So get everyone involved. And remember, we've created the Construction Dream Team LinkedIn group, and you can go to CDT for Construction Dream Team, LinkedIn.com. That's CDT, LinkedIn.com. And it's real easy. You can just push the button there and join without having to go through a bunch of different steps on LinkedIn. So with that, I am so happy that everyone was here and listening. And thank you so much, Donna, for being with us. And I look forward to more opportunities to hear from you and your great perspective. So thank you. And with that, thanks, everybody. Bye.